Hey everyone! As we already know, quantum is definitely not the element for waifus, or at least we thought so until today. Jade is another character from the IPC, and she stands out like a sore thumb compared to everyone else in the quantum element. I'm sure a lot of people were curious about her after the teaser they showed during the story, and now she's here in the flesh, and her kit looks pretty interesting to me too. Jade is an erudition follow-up specialist who plays around dealing additional damage to enemies when other teammates attack. She can also function as a solo DPS too, being able to empower her own follow-ups and deal massive damage with them. Jade looks like she'll end up being a pretty solid character, but the bar isn't really that high for IPC characters at the moment, which means I'll probably be impressed by anything at this point. As usual, this kit isn't final and will probably have an updated iteration in a couple of weeks, and I'll be making a video covering that too. But for now, let's get right into the video. As I mentioned before, Jade is a follow-up specialist, and if her snake is anything to go by, they should probably be pretty strong. As I mentioned before, Jade is a follow-up specialist, and if her snake is anything to go by, they should probably be pretty strong. Her talent is pretty standard for the IPC character archetype, having the standard meter requirement and deal a follow-up attack. In Jade's case, this is triggered when allies with her skill effect attack enemies, with each enemy attacked providing Jade with stacks. Jade can also generate stacks by herself when the skill buff isn't on her, gaining them through her basic attack and ultimate. When Jade reaches the amount required, she performs a follow-up attack dealing quantum damage to all enemies. But that's not all. For every enemy on the field, Jade will gain 1 stack of Jadeite, which increases her attack stat, with the effect persisting even after the enemy is defeated or leaves the field. When Jade performs a follow-up attack, she will gain a certain number of stacks of Jadeite. The second I read this part of her kit, I already knew she was going to be a lock-in for pure fiction. Scaling off the amount of enemies present works amazingly for heavy AoE content. Although if the attack buff is really potent, she may struggle to gain the full benefits of it in Memory of Chaos, but the stacks being permanent means that she will still probably get a good amount of them regardless. You can already see the synergy with other IPC characters, especially Aventurin, as his follow-up hits every character on the field, generating tons of stacks for Jade to fire off her own, directly boosting Topaz too. I still find it funny how they managed to sneak Robin into the IPC team, but she should work well with her too, as her having many instances of damage means she can proc Robin's additional damage a lot. Jade's skill is the main ability in her kit. When Jade uses her skill, this applies a special affect to the target of it, called Nephrite. When the ally with Nephrite attacks an enemy, Jade deals additional quantum damage to the attacked target. Jade can also empower herself with this, but it's better used on a teammate, as when the ally with Nephrite is not Jade, the ally with this effect would have their speed increased and drain a percentage of their max HP when Jade deals her additional damage. I'm actually not too sure what the drain is meant to be for, so comment if you have any ideas. The speed is fairly obviously a pretty nice benefit of not using Nephrite on herself, so I would assume she wants to be played with AoE characters to apply her additional damage to as many enemies as possible extremely often. Her ultimate is also another showing of her AoE capabilities, dealing AoE quantum damage to all enemies on the field and empowering her next few follow-up attacks, making them deal additional damage in returns for having limited uses. I also forgot to mention, but Jade's basic attack is blast instead of single target, which I find pretty cool. Moving on to her traces, Jade's are quite simple, but they have really powerful effects, like her Trace 1, providing Jade some additional energy when allies with Nephrite perform attacks, meaning that Jade will probably have some form of energy issues, and I assume this will help her quite a lot with managing it, especially on characters that attack quite frequently. Jade's second trace advances her action at the start of battle, working similarly to Robin's. This should help Jade be able to use her skill on an ally as soon as the fight starts to have full uptime on the buff. Jade's final trace is, in my opinion, the best one out of all of these, increasing Jade's crit damage with every single stack of Jadeite that she has, making her talent grant her both attack and crit damage, which is extremely good. Her third trace also grants her some crit damage after any enemy is defeated, which is again really good for content like pure fiction. Her technique summons her snake whenever she is used in the overworld like Numbi, which inflicts a blind on nearby enemies. When her technique is actually used, it shoots a bullet at an enemy, which gives Jade some stacks of her talent at the start of the battle. Overall, Jade's kit looks pretty interesting to me, especially as she looks to be another dedicated pure fiction character like Argenti is. Jade has literally no forms of single target damage in her kit, with her ultimate basic attack and talent follow-ups all being AoE, which has upsides and downsides. My main concern is that to balance having so much AoE damage, Jade may have lackluster single target, but Acheron is proof that AoE characters can have good single target, so maybe I'm just overthinking it. The only other thing I was concerned about is how Jade does damage outside of her ultimate, as since she has to use her skill to empower her allies and it doesn't do any damage, this means that Jade will have to basic attack most of the time. I wouldn't expect this to stay the same during beta, and I assume her skill will have some form of damaging effect on the final version. Aside from those few concerns, Jade looks like our first real sub DPS in Star Rail, being able to contribute a ton of damage whilst being self-reliant, as she has her own buffs and doesn't really rely on other teammates to maximize her damage. She also has the advantage of not needing to consume skill points to get her damage out, as most of her damage seemingly comes from her talent. She looks fairly universal in terms of how you'd use her, as I assume that you can basically just slot her anywhere and her performance won't change too much, but as I said before, she will probably work best with Topaz, Aventurin and Robin, as they all have great synergy with her. We don't know Jade's eidolons yet, but I would assume they focus on improving her own damage and buffs towards teammates, as the only thing I would really change on Jade is making her buff slightly more, as speed is good but having something on top of it would be pretty nice. Aside from that, I'm pretty excited for Jade. She looks like Miss Pink Elf, and that's pretty much all you need to convince me to pull. If you're interested in keeping up with leaks and you aren't instantly turned off by the terrible low-quality text-to-speech I use, you should totally subscribe to me, as I make subpar content. But that's all from me this video. Hopefully I'll see you guys tomorrow in the next video.